All right, Alexander, let's talk about what's going on in the world economy. And the first observation that I'd like to make is that Biden gave a speech the other day. He wants to give Ukraine $33 billion, but at the same time, the US economy is not doing well at all. So it doesn't seem like it's the right time to be handing out this much money to Ukraine, but whatever. I guess this is the Biden White House. What else are we to expect from these guys? What do you make of what's going on? Let's start in the U.S. first, and then we'll move
Well, well, well,
to Europe.
well, I mean, first of all, let's be absolutely clear. This GDP contraction is not surprising. Now, let's start back a year. When Biden comes in, he starts this massive economic expansion program. We, two guys on the Duran, were saying it's going to lead to higher inflation. Oh, no, 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 we're told it's going to lead to double-digit growth. Double-digit growth. Any inflation will only be transitory. Remember that? And so, surprise to surprise, what do we get? We get inflation. Couple of weeks ago, months ago, we, two guys on the Duran, were saying all this inflation is going to result in an economic contraction and a recession in the United States. Not at all, we're hearing. I was reading only a few days, about 2 weeks ago, in the New York Times, how the US economy is booming. It's going from strength to strength. That article in the New York Times was written at the very time that we now know the United States economy was contracting. And what do we hear again? We hear all kinds of clever people telling us this is transitory. It doesn't really mean anything. Underlying consumer, activity is strong. This is a blip. It's transitory again, just as the inflation was transitory. It is not transitory. Maybe we'll see an uptick in the next few months, next few weeks, maybe things will bounce up. But nobody should be under any doubt at all. When you have double-digit inflation, which is what the United States has at the moment, it's going to destabilize supply chains. It's going to result in a fall in demand, even if the Federal Reserve Board does nothing. Recession in the United States is now inevitable. And this is the first sign of it. But what is the administration doing in response to this? Well, first of all, as I said, they deny that there's even a problem. This is all a transitory problem, just as the inflation last year was a transitory problem. So let's not deal with the economy. Let's deal with Ukraine instead. Let's throw $33 billion to this black hole, which is Ukraine, a country which before the war had a GDP of $150 billion. In other words, we're going to throw as much as 20% of Ukraine's GDP at Ukraine. It's a country famous, notorious for its corruption, but of course we ignore all of that. So we're going to throw all that money at Ukraine, and we're going to still go on imposing sanctions and doing all of these things, even though that is now contributing, as everybody can see, to the inflation crisis, which is causing the underlying problems in the US economy. This is a disaster. And until this administration is changed, and I have to say this, until there is a change in the US government, this disaster is just going to go on getting worse, because they've got every economic call, not just wrong, but catastrophically, idiotically, ludicrously wrong.
Trump got impeached over a freaking phone call that was completely misinterpreted and misrepresented with Ukraine. How in God's name is the Biden White House getting away with this? And where the hell are the Republicans in all of this? I mean, I understand they don't have a majority, but they don't have that much of a minority either. I mean, how is this happening?
No. I mean, it is. First of all, you're absolutely right. I mean, can I just say again? I mean, whatever your feelings about Donald Trump, he ran the economy well. Living standards grew in the United States whilst Donald Trump was president. They didn't grow whilst Barack Obama was president, and they're now falling, and falling fast, whilst Joe Biden is president. But, Donald Trump, he wasn't perfect, but he was overall a good economic steward. As you rightly said, he was impeached twice. Once, well, over a riot in which he wasn't a participant, and the second time over a telephone call with with the Ukrainian president, which, as you correctly say, was misrepresented. He was placed under relentless siege in the media. He was called every terrible thing under the sun. People suggested that he was a Russian agent. They called him treasonous, all those things. And the Republicans in Congress, by and large, certainly in the Senate, didn't support him. And quite a number of them, let's not forget, voted for his impeachment. Joe Biden is wrecking the US economy. He is causing massive hardship to the American people. And he's throwing billions of dollars at Ukraine straight after he presided over a cataclysm in Afghanistan where, was it $1 trillion or whatever it was? I mean, I forget the numbers, but they were huge, were blown away. And as you rightly say, he's allowed to get away with it. The Republicans, they wag their fingers, but they even approve tamely his Supreme Court nominations, for example. And, they're just happy to let this thing drift on until it all falls apart. And they say to themselves, as I understand it, well, we're going to get a landslide in Congress, in November, so we'll be fine with that. And, let's just keep going and let this administration just go on doing the damage that it's doing. And, it's okay by us because fundamentally we agree with the major outlines of his policy and we don't really want to offend our donors. I mean, it's terrible. It makes you really, really wonder whether there's anything that can be done in the US that can ultimately turn this round, because the political class are broken.
Yeah, the Uniparty loves war, and I think it's safe to say right now as we're speaking that Ukraine is tearing the United States apart, and it's going to tear Europe apart, not Russia.
No.
Ukraine is going to tear the United States apart, and it's going to tear the European Union apart. And Putin and Russia have nothing to do with it, because all of this Ukraine stuff happened well before this special military operation was launched 2 months ago.
Absolutely. And I'm glad, let's get on to Europe, because of course here we see lunacy taken to an even greater level. Because I mean, I was reading the very first article I read this morning before we made this video was an article in the Financial Times. I mean, I always start with the Financial Times because, what I read there usually makes me very angry. So I decide I'll read it first and get that anger out of the way and read more sensible things elsewhere. But, the Financial Times is a newspaper. It's a good economics. Well, it was once a good economics newspaper, and it still covers economics. So what do I read? First headline: growth slows and prices rise as stagflation stalks the Eurozone. This is now what we read on the Financial Times. And it's a fact. Inflation is out of control across the Eurozone. All the indications are that the Eurozone economy, well, its so-called growth slowed just to a statistical level of a snail. We're looking at 0.1, 0.2% growth. It's quite likely, in fact, that some of that growth is simply inflation, in which case, most probably, the Eurozone is actually already in recession. In fact, I am sure it is, given that the inflation is almost certainly being wildly underreported. So what do we do? Do we prioritize getting the inflation in the Eurozone under control? Do we prioritize taking steps to try to get the economy moving again? Do we worry about the living standards of the people of Europe? No. What we're doing instead is we're talking to each other about how we're going to cut ourselves off from cheap Russian oil because, well, that's what we have to do in order to show to Mr. Putin how united we are and how much we stand behind Ukraine. Even despite the fact that Every technical expert tells us that if we do that, we're simply going to add to our inflation problems in Europe. That's what we're going to do. And, we did a program yesterday about how European companies want to find some way to conform to Putin's gas for rubles proposal, which I believe and still expect they will eventually do. But are they getting any help from European governments? No, they're just mumbling together. They're not really saying what they think about the gas for rubles proposal. And Ursula von der Leyen is telling them, no, don't do it, don't do it. We better forego the gas, better go into an even deeper recession. Let's see the inflation rise even higher, because horror of horrors, we can't give Mr. Putin rubles, his own currency, for his gas. I mean, again, one asks oneself, what kind of people run our countries nowadays? I come back to a point I made in a program some weeks ago. Once upon a time, governments existed in order to make the lives of their people better. The governments which we have today purposefully seem to want to make them worse.
I wonder if the United States, and more specifically the EU, the leaders in all the countries in Europe, most of the countries in Europe, I won't say all, most of the countries, I'll exclude, like, say, Hungary or Orban, but I wonder if they've all come to the realization, including the kleptocrats in Brussels, the van der Leyens and the Michels and the Borrells, that, you know what, we can't fix things. We just can't. We don't have the mental capacity to fix any of these problems that we've created. So we might as well go for just full-on chaos and destruction, because we can't fix it. So Poland, go in. Romania, go through Moldova, go in. Let's ramp up the war. Let's send whatever weapons we can. Let's cut off oil and wheat and metals and gas, because we might as well just implode instead of trying to somehow explain this to our voters, to our citizens, and try to somehow speak with the Russians, figure out a way out of this. So I just think they've taken the option of, you know what, let's just screw it. Let's just blow the whole thing up. Or maybe they're not smart enough to. Maybe they're not smart enough to make that decision either. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think some of them are, actually, and I'm afraid I think you may very well be right. I mean, I'm not going to say that Ursula von der Leyen comes across to me as the sort of person who's really thought that through in that kind of way. I think she still, is intoxicated with events. But I think there are others who may very well be saying that, and who will then say, well, look, all will fall apart, but we won't be blamed, because we'll blame it all on Mr. Putin and these terrible Russians. They've come and they've destroyed the great European dream, this wonderful project that we were so committed to achieving. And it's all the fault of these bad Russians. And, well, therefore, don't blame us. In fact, promote us instead. I'm very, very much afraid there are people in Brussels and in Berlin and in Paris and all the rest who may be thinking in exactly that kind of way. And that would be a disaster, because, of course, when leaders think like that, when they're actually saying to themselves, well, the only solution is chaos, then, of course, chaos will follow. But chaos is not any sort of solution.
Yeah, but they control the media. They've got a large portion of the population who are buying into this whole Zelensky Ukraine narrative. Putin bad, Zelensky Ukraine is the king narrative, and so I'm sure they're saying to themselves, let's just ram the car right into the freaking wall, and we'll be okay. But everyone else, well, who cares? We'll come back and we'll rebuild, and we'll redo the system, and we'll be all right.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I said, I'm afraid I think you've got it exactly right. I mean, if you want to find a method to this madness, that's the only one I can think of that makes any kind of sense. If there are people who understand what they're doing and are just doing it because nonetheless because they have some kind of end game, that seems to me the only possible end game. And I'm afraid there are some people in Europe who are fanatical enough and dangerous enough to think in exactly that way. But of course, let's be very clear. What they're doing is that they're destroying the economic future and indeed the economic present of Europe as well. I mean, it's very difficult to understand these policies in rational terms.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think of one European leader outside of Orbán that actually cares for his country and his people. I can't think of
Well,
one.
well, you get
I mean,
you get the odd glimmers of comments from people like the presidents of Bulgaria and Croatia, Václav Klaus, the former
okay,
president of Czechoslovakia, the present Czech President Zeman. But I
even
mean,
Bulgaria's lost its mind a little
well, I
bit.
know. I mean,
I
well,
mean,
they all have.
the prime
They all
minister
have.
has kind of,
Well, I mean, the prime minister is as bad as all the others. So, I mean, I agree. I mean, and that, it seems to me, is not chance, because clearly what happened in the months leading up to the war, is that all of the people who might have spoken out, the previous government in the Czech Republic, Kurz in Austria, people like that were just eased out. The mechanisms were found to remove them from power, so that we could find ourselves in the position that we're in today.
yeah. I don't have anything else to say. It's just
No,
it's shocking and sad to watch all of this happen. But I'll just go back and say it again. This has nothing to do with the conflict or the war. Honestly, Ukraine, whether there was a war or not, is eating away at the U.S. and at the EU and at Europe. It really
absolutely,
is. It's been doing it
absolutely.
since 2000, 2004, 2005. It's been doing it.
Absolutely. The only thing I'm going to say is this. Obviously, I'm very, very exasperated by the situation in the US. But if there is going to be a stop called, it has to be in the US. It's the only place where it can happen. And that does put a heavy political burden on the American electorate. But they do need to vote in a particular way in November. And they do not just vote for Republican candidates, because realistically, it's only the Republicans who can turn this round. But they also need to take they also need to work very hard in the primaries, because the political establishment, the Republican political establishment, are showing no sign of grasping the gravity of the crisis that the US is drifting into. So there is still a possibility that in the US things could be brought to a stop and turned round. And I do get the sense also that there's much more understanding at a sort of popular level in the US of the folly of this whole thing than there is in Europe at the moment.
All right. We'll leave it there. The Duran.locals.com, everybody, and the Duran shop, 10% off when you use the code GOODDAY. There's the mug. Take care.